with the current structure we have, you can't just say, we'll put women in charge and it will be better. You have to say, no, 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 no. Let's actually go back to basics and build something up, starting with talking and listening to women. It's all about us, and it's time to bow down. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Bow Down. Dennis, as always, so lovely to be here with you. I'm so excited. We're diving into Squid Game season 3. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about season 1 and 2. So I guess I'll just precursor spoiler alert. If you haven't watched Squid Game season 3, maybe not the episode for you. But I'll link another one up top right here so you can go check that one out if you would like to tune into a different episode of us chatting. But I'm excited to dive into this and hear all of your thoughts.
Me too. And I feel this is one of the few shows that actually got me emotionally. Like for example, when I watched the finale, when I watched the finale, my high heart rate alarm on my watch went off several times during the finale, and that that's a rarity sort of thing with me, and that had happened with some previous episodes in this season as well. So interestingly, I find myself quite vested in the show, and really the last show that I felt that same sort of heart rate intensity was Severance. So it's great we talked about Severance. I thought that was incredible. I think we'll get a lot of good stuff here. So with that, and with everyone, thank you for being here. It is lovely to be here. Reese, as always, you look stunning. It's so great to be here.
Thank you.
It had been, I don't know, it's been like 10 days since we last recorded.
Yeah.
So it feels like it's been forever. So it's so great to be back.
It is. It absolutely is. Getting back in the swing of things. Well, I suppose let's start with what you just brought up. In the finale, your heart rate raised, you're more emotionally invested in this. And I agree, there is something. I mean, obviously, season 1 of Squid Game was just like literally a worldwide phenomenon. Everyone watched it, and it was like everyone was obsessed with it. And I don't think anyone will ever forget the first scene of Red Light, Green Light that we saw. Right? I'm like, even just saying that, I'm like kind of flashing back to it, and I just got goosebumps thinking about it and how visceral and primal the relationship to this show was for me in season 1, and how that's shifted and changed and morphed through these seasons. But what do you think it is about this show that draws that global, just human being response to it, but also for you personally? Like, why is this one of those ones that just hits that spot in you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me in particular, because it's very rare that I actually, I mean, I watch stuff, but rarely does it speak to me or get me involved or engaged. And I'm also curious, as you said that, I wonder if my reasons for engagement as a man are different than perhaps other like women's reasons for watching. I'm very curious to see. For me, I know there's a part of me that puts myself in the game. And so watching it makes me wonder, what would I survive? How would I do? And I think this is a common phenomena that may, skew towards men, in that I also sometimes enjoy watching these. I don't know that they're so prevalent, but like 5 years ago, they were everywhere, like Lockdown, like Lockdown, San Francisco Bay Prison, like all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And some people don't like watching that. Like it's boring, but I always, if it was on, sometimes I would watch it in sort of for the similar way. It's a safe way to wonder, how would I handle that situation?
Yeah.
What are my, what would I feel in that situation? So for me, I think it really is putting myself, not necessarily in the shoes of the protagonist, 456, what, Junhee, I guess. And I'm probably going to use numbers more than names, only because I'm going to botch the phonetics and because they're Korean names. And so, but no disrespect meant to any of the wonderful actors who are part of this, but so our protagonist, like, it wasn't that I was trying to be him or see what I would do if I were him, but really just if I were in the games, how would I behave?
Right.
Um, and so for me, I think that was a real intriguing piece of this for me. Like,
Yeah.
what would my responses have been to things? Would I have sacrificed myself at the end, for example? How what would I have done in those situations? Would I have and we can talk more about, but that was, I think for me, that's what got my heart rate up because I put myself in that position. Like if I were there, how would I respond to it? But what about you? I'm curious
Yeah.
how what the click was for you, especially.
Totally. I absolutely relate to what you're saying, and I don't know if that's an everyone thing or not because that is so something that I had like you were saying with those TV shows, that was me with like young adult dystopian novels when there was the moment of like Divergent, Hunger Games, The Darkest Minds, City of Bones. Like there was this whole section of like fantasy and dystopian young adult. There is a girl who is probably 16 to 20 that is the savior somehow, and she is the one, right? And 16 to 20-year-old Reese was like, yes, there is something about the like Aristotelian catharsis of experiencing really, really difficult and dark things in this safe way, like you said, that I think really taps into that primal sense of like, oh my gosh, what would that actually feel like? But we feel safe letting ourselves go there. But also, I do have this almost like martyr savior complex that I think I've addressed and healed recently because I don't find myself relating as much to like in Divergent. Also spoilers for the Divergent trilogy now here. But at the very end in the third book, the main character commits suicide essentially to save the future of humanity. And I remember reading that at like about 18 probably is when I was reading it when it came out, and we were about the same age going through this, and I was like, that's the most noble thing a person could do. And now I mean there's all of the quotes of like dying for something is easy, living for something is harder, right? And like, sure, you'd die for someone. Would you live for someone? And I do think that's kind of a page that I have turned. But there is still this piece of like nobleness and legacy and character that I think really comes through when you're put in dire circumstances. Because, of course, everyone wants to think that in the school shooter situation, they'll be the one to jump in front and save the kids, right? They'll be the one to run into the burning building and save the child or the grandma. But fight or flight and our primal instincts, we do not get to decide those things. But there is this human ability to uplift certain amounts of response and like a certain type of response to things. And Squid Game is just fight or flight the whole fucking time. Like you would never be out of that in that situation. And I think part of why it is so powerful is because 456, the entire series chooses nobility and character again and again and again. And I think there is something really um like self-righteously vindicating about the idea that like, see, it is possible. And for me, as someone who is often told like you're naive, that's not how the world works, about my worldview, and it's like very much Squid Game shows that how dark and in the depths of the human psyche and what we will go to for things that it doesn't seem like it's worth it to do, but we will. Humans all have that shadow side, but there is this character that we root for that is hope incarnate, that is, how do you choose justice time and time again? And we see someone do it. And yes, he sacrifices his life for it at the end, which sucks. But I think that is really the only ending we could have seen for 456 at the end of his character arc, for it to really feel rounded out, and the message of the show to land, right? That it's like, sometimes, like, we want a world where hope and justice prevail. We all do. We all root for 456, and yet he still dies. And even if we do have these better angels within us, are those eventually going to be pressed out because of the systems that we live in? And so I think it's addictive to me to see someone hopeful win at the end of the first season, right? I was like, what? Even though, of course, he loses a part of himself through doing that. But we still see the goodness win, and he goes back and fights to take the whole thing down.
Yeah. He I always found I found his behavior interesting. And I had no idea what was going to happen at the end. Fortunately, I remained spoiler free. And my money was actually on him turning into the new director, essentially. So I thought this was going to be more of a Darth Vader kind of
Mm,
arc. That's my money was on that. So I was actually a little not surprised, but I didn't quite get what I somehow I was expecting. Like I I thought somehow he would um yeah, I thought somehow he would turn into to the mask, the director at the end,
sure.
like he was the replacement. And then when he wasn't, um yeah, that was interesting to me. I mean I I guess it makes sense. I think if I were him, I probably would have cut the throat of all those people, to be honest with you. If you want the honest truth of it. Like I I would have been very tempted to do that. Um of course when you do that, it's a perfect example though that you become exactly what you're railing against.
Right.
Like, you know what? And it's a really interesting, I think, illustration of that principle. Like, and you can't you reap what you sow. And
Yeah.
if you don't plant apple seeds and get orchids.
Yeah.
And an apple tree doesn't say, "Maybe I should make an orchid today." It wouldn't be much of an apple tree. So, if it doesn't matter how justified you are, you become what you behold. And if
Mhm.
you're looking for revenge, if you're putting judgment on these other people and saying, "I am your executioner," you become that. I mean, you become,
Yeah.
you become what you behold. And so I was actually surprised because I thought that's where they were going with it. And I actually, um I never had a good opinion of 456, to be honest with you.
Mm,
I never really thought of him as I never thought of him as a good or evil. Like I can't say I put
mhm.
good or evil on him, but he never really impressed me as any. He never did anything strategic. He's kind of like Milchek from
Yeah.
from Severance. Kind of everything he did, it only succeeded because of other people.
Yeah. It was kind of luck, and he is kind of pathetic in a way in the first season, for sure, of like, this is our hero. He's just kind of bumbling.
Yeah, I mean he's very Clouseau-esque in a way. Obviously not so comedic, but if you really, I mean, like he has no real plan. Everything he tries to do flops. He ends up back. I mean, he's only alive. I mean, his idea to take over the games was ridiculous. I mean, it was ill-fated regardless of anything else. It was very immature and childlike. It was not well thought out. Um, so, you know, I don't know. He never impressed me as a character.
Mm,
I never even thought morally he was super, like super convicted, which is why even I mean, and again, I didn't think he was a bad guy either. Like, I wouldn't see him as the kind to throw the baby off the, off the cliff,
right,
sort of thing.
right.
Like, I don't feel he was evil. I don't feel much about anything towards him as a
Mm,
protagonist. Like, so, like, it wouldn't have satisfied me for him to win again, let's say, and now have 50 million won or billion
right.
or whatever whatever the fuck amount of money it is, just some crazy amount of money. So yeah, it's interesting that you had that take.
Yeah. Well, and I wondered too, I do think throughout the seasons, because in season 1, it is very much like, this guy's pathetic. He's, and kind of just gets lucky all the way through. Absolutely. I think where I really shifted was in season 2, where I'm like, it is stupid for you to go back into the game and to think that that's how you're going to do this. But I guess I had this, and maybe it is a little bit of that naive piece of me that is like this naive hope of like, he's trying. And I think in season 2, seeing someone try, right? That it's like there are other winners that aren't doing anything and he is. Um, and so even in you saying that, I'm like, my opinion of him really did shift throughout the seasons, actually. Because in season 1, I completely agree. But I think by the end of season 3, I was very much at, he died the hero, right? In this sense of like, you either die the hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And through the flashbacks of the current masked man, and I'm forgetting his name and his number when he went. Inho,
Inho,
yes.
I think. And wasn't he number 1? Wasn't he 001? I thought
Yes, I think
he was
so.
001 versus 456.
Right. We see that like he got the same essentially deal as 456 did and took it. And so there is that interesting foil that we see, but he had to die to stay the hero. And I do think that that is kind of the message in this archetypal sense. So that is really interesting that I did have such a strong, and maybe part of that is projection, now that I'm thinking about this too, that it's like, I really want someone to be fighting for justice and hope despite all of the reasons to despair that the show gives us, right? It's like, that is kind of this persistent quality that I think I have. So maybe some of that is projecting onto 456 a little bit, that I wish that we had someone that just is really, really noble. But I will say in season 3, I think, and maybe this will take us a little bit more into the gender dynamics at play too, the relationship that he has with the baby and 222, I want to say, the mother, and him saying like, I mean, once again, I completely agree with you that like trying to overthrow in this coup from the inside was like really not smart. It wasn't well thought out. Like, we need to be a little bit more strategic as the quote unquote good guys. And same thing with the jump rope game, right? Where he's like, I'm going to get across with the baby. I'll set the baby down, and then I'm going to come back and get you and carry you across. I'm like, dude, there is 3 minutes on that clock. That's not happening. That is not happening. And it's just dumb to think that it would have. And I do think that if there was like some sort of more strategic approach, I mean, I don't know how you get out of that situation without a whole lot of luck and some support besides just him. But I do think that if the baby daddy helped 222 across, that maybe is the only way she would have survived that episode. But it's like, there was no way he was going to go back and take her across. And yet his intention there was pure. And that, I think, was this kind of solidifying piece for me of like, at least he's trying. He's just not really good at it. Or is that the message of the show, that he's not good at it, or that the system is impossible to actually succeed with pure intention? I don't know.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, or at least I knew watching, and I think a lot of people did. Like, her ankle was a death sentence, like for
Yes.
that, especially for that particular challenge. Like, it doesn't. He could have come. All that was going to happen is, the question is do you have 2 people die or 1 person die? Like, that's the question you're asking yourself. It was very much a triage situation. You know, like, yes, not attending to her sucks because you know she's going to die, but attending to her means you both die. There's just literally, it's physically impossible for her to complete that challenge and help. He can't jump with her on his back. So,
Yeah.
this isn't like, oh, I just, the baby. Yeah, he could do it with the baby. I mean, it's definitely challenging because you're a little bit, he is an expert at making
Encumbered.
in slings for the baby. I'm very impressed with how
Yeah.
makeshift those. Because, like, for me, the thing would have fallen apart and the baby would have dropped and then I would have fallen and, that would have been the
Yeah.
episode.
Yeah.
Something like that. But, yeah, I agree. And, I mean, here's an interesting question, though, maybe as with respect to the pregnancy storyline, which is, I got to be honest, a little bit of a hackneyed storyline to me. I mean, very, very convenient there. But let's take it at face value. But what are they trying to say? What are the writers trying to say? And so this pregnancy storyline for Junhee 222, there's one of two possibilities. Well, at least two possibilities. You could see it as reducing um her to motherhood. So really all she became was a mother, or you could see it as elevating motherhood as resistance. So the very fact that, this life survived was a form that this child survived is a form of resistance. And I'm just curious, which of those two resonates with you as I ask that question as we talk about it.
Wow. Yeah. What a beautiful question, because I agree. When we learned that she was pregnant, I was a little bit like, oh, eye roll. They very clearly were like, this would be a cool storyline to explore some different themes. But I do think it explored some cool themes. So taking it at face value, I very much felt like watching it that it was women are reduced to mothers, and her entire narrative became about protecting her baby. And even in communicating with the other women that were there to and supported her, and the other mother in the game that was the much older mother that actually killed her son to save the pregnant woman and the baby, right? That it's this like, motherhood is sacrifice, right? I think is the message that we see. And when you choose to become a mother, that has to be all that you are, is very much what I think the motherhood lines give us in this narrative. And I do think that that's not as critiqued as much as it should be in the show, because I do think that is a function of systemic capitalism in a lot of ways, because, we want the birth rates to stay high so we have enough good cogs in the machine to make money. And I think also the baby then being replaced as 222 very much communicates this message of like, and your debt is passed on as well as your wealth, and what does generational wealth mean, and all of these things. But both of these women that were mothers in the show and showed these two different aspects of motherhood were still just mothers. They were just mothers. And I actually, at one point, thought she might have, kind of tried to give herself an abortion while in there, or tried to give up the baby somehow, or talk to the guards and be like, I don't know what you're going to do, but because I don't know if anyone would be able to actually kill their own child if they weren't severely going through some sort of, mental
Psychosis or
right,
yeah,
exactly.
totally.
Because it is this like very life for a life, and it's like, well, when you're a mother, you've already sacrificed your life for the child. Might as well actually sacrifice your life for the child, was kind of the thing. I wish that we saw a little bit more of motherhood as resistance, because I think that there is a sense in which it can be in this it's a miracle of creation. It is a gift that women have been given to be able to create out of nothing in a world that tells us, workers should be as separate from the means of production as possible. Motherhood is just about as close as the worker could get to the means of production. And yet, you're still just reduced to producer, not anything else. And I do think that we just see it reduced to mother as opposed to any resistance. But what do you think? I think there's other readings you could make, but I think that was my take as I was watching, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it showed the desperation that she must have been under to make the choice to join the games in the first place.
Yeah.
Because just, I mean, I think it shows the vulnerability of women who don't have a support system. Right. I mean, and 333, I guess I might be a little unclear. I don't know if they were boyfriend and girl. I assume the kid was his. It seems
Yes, yeah.
like he was kind of a wannabe gangsta. It's like, so like, obviously there was, it was that kind of a relationship. But she must have been felt so alone and so like had no other choice because been at the end of her rope. Because why else would you choose to participate in these games? And
Yeah.
yes, I know you don't realize that people are dying, presumably, which is kind of interesting because we as the audience know what they're signing up for. Maybe they don't know what they're signing up for, really. But nevertheless, the votes inside show that the majority of which I think was a very clever way of showing everything. And even in the beginning of the second season, where the dude who recruits people is going around offering them bread, or remember that weird, it's a really weird scene almost. Very beginning of season 2 where he's going around offering people, hey, you can either have food, or Korean bakery treats, it looked like, which are awesome.
Yes.
There's a Korean bakery right by our house, and it's like, I love you so much. Like, can I just go there? Fortunately, it's like 10 miles away, so I can't go every day because honestly, it's like the best. But so I'm watching him destroy these treats, and I'm like, damn, I want one of those. Like, forget the lottery ticket. Give me the treat. But all but one of the people he gave it to chose the lottery ticket versus the actual food. And I think that everyone who was in these games chose to be there.
Yeah.
That's something to remember. But I think what's interesting though is if you view it as sort of the capitalist, sort of grind, right? That's what this whole thing is. It's a metaphor, the metaphor for capitalism in some senses, how it's uncaring, it doesn't care. I think it does show how it affects mothers and women differently than it does. I mean, yes, the show became popular because of some of the female characters, but this is a male-led show. Let's be very clear. Like, this show does not, to me, pass the best. What is it? The Bechdel test.
Bechdel test. Yeah.
Bechdel
No.
test. It does not pass that test, really, to my knowledge. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is a scene, but it's definitely a male-driven show. But yet, I think the women are what made it. If it was just men, it would have been Glengarry Glen Ross, and I don't know that it would have been quite as interesting. But yet even at the end of the day, though, the men were the ones ultimately who were in contention, yet the baby won in the end. So the ultimate sort of feminist ending in some senses, like the innocence won essentially.
Yeah.
In that case. So I don't know. It's yeah, I'm kind of two minds because it's kind of like this idea to me of choice theory in a way, which people are making choices all the time. They all chose to play this game. They may not have known the rules, but even when they did, they all chose to stay in the game. So there were no victims there, no matter what. Nobody there was a victim. They were there because they chose to be there. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it good,
Right.
of course. But again, that I don't think nobody was dragged there against their will, which I think is a point that the show is making. Interestingly. So, but let's talk a little bit about the capitalistic angle and go back to how it does, I think, affect women more than it does men in some senses.
Yeah.
Particularly, I mean, because I've seen it in my years in corporate America. Unfortunately, I don't have to go to corporate America, but there is absolutely that double standard in corporate America for a woman versus a man, without question. And I would argue that that is also true in the games, in the sense that the vast majority of the games do tilt towards strength matters in many of the
Yeah.
games. Um,
Well, and
you know,
it's interesting that they're childhood playground games and they still tilt towards strength. Obviously, they're on such a big scale that's like, okay, jump rope on this small beam in the actual Squid Game is different than jump rope on a playground in terms of the amount of strength and wherewithal you need. But still, I think that there's an interesting line there too that's like, it does lean towards a physical prowess, as do childhood games in success.
yeah, and does that represent how the table is stacked to some degree in corporate America for women versus men, regardless of the equality, regardless of everything we try to do. The fact that women get paid, I don't know what the current statistic is, but at one point it was 78 cents on the dollar for every dollar a man earns, sort of thing. How does the show reflect that? I mean, if we look at just looking at the last season, the 6 games, right? So the first game, red light, green light, one could argue that there's no particular advantage gendered there. Although being fast is good, but also being able to stop is important. So that I could say red light, green light, you could call a wash in terms of, and in fact, if you were little, it's easier to hide behind somebody. So maybe being
Sure.
smaller is, given the way the cameras work and so on. Um, what was the second game?
Um, there
Gosh, that
was
was
the little cookie tree. I don't know if that was the second one. But where they had to use the needle to scrape the shape
right.
out
Which
of
that was
the
certainly not. There was no gender
no
advantage
strength there.
to that
Yeah, yeah,
whatsoever.
yeah.
Yeah, that one was even. The Well, there was the game where in the first season, which was where you were betting. I don't remember the exact game, but it was like there was a betting component, like how many they had different. You had 20 stones, and you had to somehow get it down to 0 stones, and
Yeah, the
there was no
marbles kind of
yeah, the
thing.
marble thing that wasn't gendered, but most of
Mhm.
the others to me, hide and seek game this season was
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that was very
Well,
clearly, strength matters there.
the
I mean,
first
working a
season,
knife.
the kind of the floor is lava bridge one where you're jumping across and trying not to break the floor. I thought it was remarkable that people were able to just jump across. I'm like, I don't know if I could jump that far
Right,
to
right.
begin with. Like, I don't have a long jump. I don't have a height jump. Even as being a volleyball player, you would think that my vertical isn't too bad, but I'm like, that's why I'm a setter and not on the front row. Like, I don't I that is not my physical skill set. Well, and then I'm even thinking about the in this season, or maybe it was season 2, but the like kind of merry-go-round game where then you had to get the amount of people to go in the room, and you see people grabbing each other or
Right, yeah, there's a
pushing
physical.
someone else
Yeah.
away or holding the door shut, right? Like there's still, even in the games that it's like you wouldn't necessarily think that physicality comes into play, ultimately might equals right in a lot of these games, because even if it's like, hey, I was there first, if someone can get into that room and pull you out, hey, it doesn't really matter, if you were there first or not. Clearly that level of justice isn't being served here in the Squid Game. And I think your point about money on the dollar is also interesting too, because one thing that occurred to me when you said that, I think now it's like technically 81 cents on the dollar, but I also know that it is the lowest for Black women, I want to say, and then I want to say Asian women might make the most out of it. So all that to say, race certainly plays a part in this too. And one thing just to be mindful of as feminists, to also like include the intersectionality of identity there. So interesting point there. But even with winnings, right, and making a certain amount of money, if 222 had won, does she technically win the same amount of money if she has to take care of another human being? that's very different than someone having a certain amount of debt that they have to pay off and then taking the winnings, right? They have their debt that they earned for themselves. She has a child that she can't afford to take care of. She is not making anything from those winnings other than not going into debt herself to pay for this child. And I think that that's something we see in reflected in divorces and alimony and child support very much, that it is like typically it is the woman that has to bear not only the emotional burden and the physical burden of birth, but also the financial burden. And there's a lot of discourse around how child support and alimony very clearly favors women, and that that's a sexist policy because it's gendered in that way. And I'm like, you know, and this is something we've talked about before, where it's like how much overcorrection within equity is kind of needed to eventually hopefully get to a place of equality. But it's like, I think it's kind of fair that women do tend to get more money in those situations because of the way that the system is stacked against them. Because they are the ones likely that are going to be going clothes shopping with the kids, back to school shopping, thinking about the kinds of lunches that they're going to pack for school and the money that that costs, thinking about putting them in sports or classes or things that cost money that kids obviously can't afford to pay for themselves. That's something that women tend to just take on, is that added burden of caretaking, and caretaking does just cost money. And then another thing that I wanted to bring up as well, I had a conversation with some friends the other day about how in interviews, you're not allowed to ask if a woman is pregnant or not, or if she's trying to get pregnant, or what her pregnancy relationship is, and all of that stuff. And a friend of mine the other day was interviewing someone with her boss for a potential position, and the woman just offered that she was pregnant. And they didn't ask, but she offered it up, and she said that's why she didn't get the job. She was a perfect fit and offered up that she was pregnant. And my boss said, we need someone. We can't afford to do that. And I was sitting there just kind of flabbergasted because I'm like, that just feels so wrong to me, right? But also from a purely economic stance, you understand the logic of the decision. Sorry, that was like 70 million different points on that, but
No, I actually I love that point, because I would argue that the way the baby 222, we'll say, is treated is exactly how in America we treat babies of women who work.
yeah,
It is, I mean, to me, that's I mean, yes, it's but it is this, who cares who cares about the baby? Like, what have you done for me? Like, we know that our parental leave on both sides, by the way, is, and this is both a male and a female issue, because, I mean, first of all, it's too little for everyone involved. I mean, it's harmful to the child. I personally believe, to not have the mother there. And to have to go back after, most places it's 3 months, I think, is policy. FMLA. I mean, and again, I haven't, it's been a while since my daughter was born, so I don't really know what the latest is, but I do know, there's significant sacrifices you take, both from a pay perspective, because FMLA doesn't cover everything, but also just from an expectation of the employer perspective. And it's the same thing like when you're grieving when somebody dies. Depending on how close the person was to you, if it was a grandfather, okay, you can grieve for a weekend, but we want you in next week.
yeah,
But there's a statute of limitations on how long you're allowed to not be fully productive in the environment because of something happening, and that varies. And for kids, for having a newborn, it's probably a couple of months, right? In the U.S. at
yeah,
best. For a dad, it's like a week.
yeah,
Like, I remember I took 2 weeks off when my daughter was born, and um, that was barely allowed. That was like, and I had to dip into my uh, my days off. I think I used all my days off, and I think I had like 2 weeks off. And my wife had her own business, so she had even less time off in a sense because
Right.
it was her own business. So she, within a month, she was trying to get back to doing some work, and then granted, it was at home and stuff, and but still,
Yeah.
like how much better would our world be, our country be, if there were full 1 year mandated parental leaves? Like,
Yeah.
where you don't have to, and now maybe the businesses I mean, because now on the same time, like if I'm a small business owner, I can't afford that. I get that.
Right.
But that's why we have a government. Like that's why that's why there should be something bigger. Like, yes, as a small business owner, I couldn't afford to do that. I know that. Like I wish I could. Now could a big corporation? Yeah, I think that big corporations could, but I also think the government should play a role in that and providing some of that help. But I think it's interesting how we're aghast at how this child is treated when they're talking about what to do. Should the baby be a part of it? Oh, how unfair this is. Why should the baby be a player, et cetera, et cetera? But we do that here
Yeah.
in a metaphorical way. But I
Yes.
would argue in just as damaging in some ways.
Absolutely. Well, and even just the psychological evidence we have behind like time spent in early childhood and imprinting and physical touch and just there is oodles and oodles and oodles of research around early childhood and infant psychology development that it's like as much time as you can get with your caretakers, the better. The better, the better, the better. And we as a country really like to say that we care about our kids and we care about the future and no child left behind and especially like abortion debates being about like, well, that's a child, that is a child that you are murdering, and I'm like, great, what happens when the child's born?
That's somebody else's problem.
Right.
You know,
You don't
that's
care
that's the
about that kid. You do not fucking care about that kid. You care about some other issue. Well, and okay, clearly I I have feelings about this, but we as a country say that we really have these principles about things that aren't put into place. And it's like if we actually really did care about children, 1 year mandated maternity leave would absolutely be in place. And yes, that inherently benefits parents and women that are reproducing, but it's that's kind of the side effect from trying to care for our kids. Same thing with school policies and taking care of teachers, right? I'm like, we say that we care about these kids, and yet the people that we treat the worst are the people responsible for our future. And it's kind of like actions speak louder than words. And I 100% agree with you that, uh, John Locke has the quote, if men were perfect angels, there would be no need for government. The reason why we have a government is so that there are social safety nets to create forward movement, progress, and protection around the things that we value and care about. And if we say that that is our future in kids, then that's the government's job to come in and put up these structures in place to systemically support this growth. But it's actually the system that prevents people. I mean, the fact that you had no other PTO for the rest of the year, like you're sick and you're like, well, I had a daughter, so I'm going to have to go into work sick. And that's bad for everyone else in
which
the
makes everybody else
office.
sick. It's bad for me.
Right.
It's bad for
It's bad
everything.
for
Yeah.
everyone. It's not symbiotic. It's not mutually beneficial. It's like, it's so backwards thinking, but it's because we're so short term focused in these goals. And I just obviously I've never had a child, so I can't imagine the decision making process that you and your wife had to go through too, with even as an entrepreneur and having your wife having her own business, like needing to make the call of like, okay, at what point do I need to like be juggling this other thing now too and adding it back in. And like you said, working from home, there's some more flexibility there, but actions speak louder than words, even on a societal level.
And I mean, regardless of how, I mean, even if I mean, we had a great situation. We had a lot of familial support. We had both sets of
Right.
grandparents around, and and you know, very positively, our daughter had a wonderful always was in a loving place and you know, with and was cared for. We were lucky. We were
Yeah.
privileged. It was absolute privilege. No, I mean, we also chose to live near our near our parents so that we would have that. Our parents wanted to do this. We would no, you know, there was no everyone was happy with it, but we were very fortunate and
Right.
not everybody has parents who are willing and able to do that. And that's okay too. Like there's, you know, grandparents don't have to do that. No, would we like them to? Sure. I mean, it was a wonderful blessing, and I'm glad, and I think it was a blessing to them as well to get to see my
Yeah.
daughter grow, and so I mean, but you know, the fact is my wife was still stressed from work, like
Yeah.
stressed from the day, and then to come home and be with our daughter, like that all of that has a psychological, energetic impact. You know, no
Yeah.
matter what, no matter how great your life is different than just being able to focus on my daughter. And again, we all need breaks from that too, right? I mean, not
Yeah.
everybody, and that's the other thing, like, not every woman is like, you know, a mother. Like some
Right.
women are very mothering. That's part of their design. They are designed to be mothering. That is what they were created for in some senses. And it gives them fulfillment and it gives them joy. And they should be honored for that because it's awesome. There's other women who that's not their design. And that doesn't make them any less than the motheriest mother. It means that they're not designed for that. So why do
Yeah.
we force people or shame people to think, "Oh, you have to motherhood is the pinnacle of every experience." Is motherhood wonderful? I don't know. I'm not a mother, but I assume yes. And it probably also sucks in a lot of ways
Yeah.
too. So to all you mothers who've had your bodies distended and like all these hormones going crazy, and maybe your life is never the same because your body's never exactly the same after giving birth because it's
Right.
so traumatic on your body. Like, love you for that. But if you don't choose that path, if that's not what's for you, there's no shame in that either.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and to tie that back into what you mentioned earlier about motherhood being resistance or it being something that women are just reduced to, I think in a society that does oftentimes reduce women to mother, even women that reproduce and do have kids, there is very much a societal difference between, like you said, the most mothering mother of all mothers and the woman who is a good mother, but just doesn't have the kind of cookie cutter image of what the best mom of the year should look like. Even though she's a mother, her personhood is put up for debate because if you're reduced to mother, then how mothery you are is how much of a person you are. Like, there's a direct correlation there. And I think another thing that just keeps coming up in my mind too, there's a pastor that just kind of went viral because the piece was done on him and by CNN, and the video about this article literally opens with him saying, "Women are reproducing machines. That is what they were made for." And the journalist interviewing him is a woman and was like, "So what do you think about me being a journalist?" And he was like, "Well, that's fine. Do you have kids?" It's just this like, it's not I think also there's this idea that like, well, yeah, all these things you're talking about, like, we all know and we all see, but like we're moving in the right direction. But I'm like, these ideas of women just being baby making machines are not fringe. And these ideas of women just being reduced to motherhood are not fringe. They are the water that we swim in. And if we are not actively taking steps to it, it almost makes me think of this idea of like Ibram X. Kendi's book How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? Like, it's not enough just to not be racist. As a white person, it is my duty to actively learn and be anti-racist. And I think it's the same thing with motherhood. And I mean, bringing back in intersectionality and race to that too, like how much more difficult this is on Black women and women of color and people who are systemically oppressed in other ways, that it's like you said, even motherhood as it is hard enough. And you and your wife were privileged in a lot of ways too.
And it was still difficult as hell.
Right.
Like, this was not some cakewalk. Like, and we did wonderfully and we did terribly, and in certain areas, like, we always did it with love.
Yeah.
We did our best, but no one's good enough to be a parent.
Yes.
Because and everyone is if when you operate in love, but we don't make it economically easy to be parents for
Yeah.
sure. Speaking of motherhood, I think that's a great segue into that the mother son relationship in the final season, and particularly the at the end where she stops her son.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what did you take away from that whole dynamic through the last 2 seasons?
You know, it was so interesting because to know that she was there for him, it was just like, man, it never stops, does it? And I'm sure you feel that too, that it's like once you're a parent, you're always a parent. Like, no matter how old your kid is, you are always a parent. And just knowing that his mom just had this huge sense of responsibility that it's like, well, I'm here for you. And of course, there were some really lovely moments of levity in their relationship, but also to get to a place, I think that scene was when I felt the most emotional through this whole season, actually, because there's really something about mothers hurting their kids that hits me in a really specific way. Like, I remember watching The Conjuring for the first time and the mother being possessed and hurting her kids because she's possessed, and how like deeply disturbing that was to me. I think to this day that's one of the scariest things that I've ever seen, because it is just so the antithesis of everything like in your DNA, right? That is like, no, as a kid, your mother is your one, right? And as a mother, it is your job to be there for your kid. And it is just like so primordial in that sense. And yet, she stops him. And I honestly can't put my finger on even really why she valued this other girl and her baby more. I mean, sure, this baby's younger. The girl did nothing wrong. Her son was kind of going through a psychotic break in that moment. They'd been through a lot. Like, there's so many variables there. But I can't even really put my finger right now on why it hit me so hard beyond it just feeling innately wrong. And also, why she decided to do that. Like, and did she even do it consciously? But to override that system of like, this is your kid, I would have to imagine that takes some conscious decision making. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I didn't like the son very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be honest with you, like, so I was thrilled. In some like I didn't, I was not particularly emotional from that scene because I'm like, kill the fucker, like he's an asshole, like how it was just sort of my visceral.
Sure.
Your son's a piece of shit,
He
lady. You
sucks.
know it. We know it. You're all gonna die anyway. You know, I mean, and in that sense, I mean, that's the other thing. Like, we know this doesn't have a happy ending.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I mean, obviously she dealt with a lot of guilt, right? Because she hanged herself afterwards. And, I think it was very brave to do that. And I can't imagine actually doing that to stop her son. Um, and I also, I thought it was very brave of her to even volunteer herself. Like, hey, I've lived a long life. Like, again, it's showing a mother's love.
Yeah.
Um, which I think was super, super powerful. Um, but he was so. I mean, it was so clear he wasn't going to make it out of this alive to begin with. So that kind of shaded everything for me. But I think it does show the power. And here's a question: if she hadn't just given birth to the newborn, would his mother have stopped him?
Yeah.
Like, did that spark something? hey, there's more, there's more than this. And um yeah, it's a very interesting, it's an interesting situation how the men in, the men in there who who did not really know what they stepped up for. So, I'm thinking like the 125 who died in the last challenge and the last couple of he died on the the pushing them off the high the cliff
Mm-hmm.
challenge in the end. But generally all of the guys, the men who were not savages and not willing to do what it's just generally didn't last long.
Yeah.
Um, which is which is interesting. And one might argue that they were again that they were not being manly or whatever the case is. And but because they didn't want to kill people. They that they didn't want to do that. And ultimately I don't think they were able to. Um,
Yeah.
I mean the only reason 125 did at the end was because he went, kind of he was either in withdrawal or drugged or whatever the case was is the only reason he ended up killing and making it through to the end.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, but I think it was very powerful what she did, just as a message to say, yeah, I know this is going to kill you. Like, and she didn't kill him. I mean, the guards did. It was very brave of her though at the end to make that decision, in my opinion. Like she did, like I said, she didn't kill her son directly in that she only paralyzed him, I'm suspecting, and the gun, because the the guards came and shot him later, but effectively
Right.
she knew what she was doing and again
Yeah.
felt the guilt for that. Um, I think another interesting character to talk about is the guard, number what was her number 11? Noelle, I
Oh,
guess her name was.
yes. Yes, yes, yes.
And so I think, I'd love to, I think she's another character who um is interesting in the sense that she tried to break the system from within to me in some senses. So like she actually was subverting from the inside and keeping her choices who she wanted to kill. And it's interesting how 246, the guy who eventually I guess did get saved at the end of the show, she actually saved him because
Yeah.
of their time at Disney World or whatever the Korean version of Disney World was.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, she went from enforcing the game's violence to exposing its corruption, essentially. And ultimately, she was responsible for the end of the Korean games on that island. Now, we see at the end, though, that they're eternal and they're impossible to stop because human nature is what it is, which is kind of
Right.
depressing. It's a depressing ending. But I don't know, what were your, she to me, she proved that women can infiltrate these patriarchal power structures and blow them up when done
Yeah.
in some ways. I mean, she literally burned it down and she took off the mask, both literally and figuratively, this mask she was wearing to save lives instead of taking them in the end.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. What were your thoughts on Noelle or I don't know how you pronounce her.
I I really it's interesting because it's like which storylines are the most like a page turner essentially when you're watching them, and it's like you always have your favorite ones that are happening. Um and it wasn't necessarily the one that I was like looking forward to going back to, but I'm really glad that they included it because at the end of season 1, that was the piece that I was so captivated by that like we didn't have answered was like, who are all these people that are working this thing that they're able to keep silent? Like, how are they able to keep all these people silent about it? And how have they not been able to, like crumble from the inside out? Like, you would think that at some point this gets out. It was just like, how would the show even justify that really working? And so I thought it was really fascinating to see that. Um, and I agree with you in this like one woman on her own really trying to like do something. And I believe she was also a mother, right? And she had lost, or was it her brother
Yeah,
that
yeah,
they
no,
were?
no, she was. Yeah, you're right. I think her daughter. She had left North Korea, but had to
That's
leave
right.
her daughter behind. But at the end, she went to China to find her daughter. That was her.
Yes.
So she had as happy of an ending, I think, as anyone
As
has in this show in some
right
senses.
as possible. And even then, how much of her humanity did she have to sacrifice along the way? as she was going. And even then, in the beginning, it's like, is she mercy killing these people? Is she a vengeful murderer who's just trying to like get her bloodlust out and found a way to do it? Before we're really fully clued in onto what's going on. And I think it just reinforces this message of like, you know, with great power comes great sacrifice. Like if you want to crumble a system, you have to crumble part of yourself too, I think. And I really, really liked the scene of her just sitting there amidst the fire that she had started amongst all of the files and information. Um, kind of knowing that she was going to be okay, but also you could tell that she just had this resignation that was like, and it's okay if I'm not, because she did what she set out to do. And I'm like, her motivation was just the clearest among everyone. And there was something so powerful about that, and that she actually did damage. Because I think sometimes when the system feels so big, small acts of rebellion just feel so useless. But she was one person, and she still really did some fucking damage. I think the other thing with her character, and I think this was season 2, that I found really fascinating was the dynamic with the other guards. And there was the scene where she's almost sexually assaulted by the other guards because she's not like playing by the rules. And just the way that, you know, the Squid Game isn't just the players, it's also the guards that like, that's also kind of in this like Stanford prison experiment kind of way, right? Like they're all in on this. It's all an experiment about the human condition, and everyone is being subjected to this. And even though they're not necessarily putting their lives at risk, they're certainly sacrificing their humanity for something to be there. And to know that there was still that patriarchal enforcement of like, and I'm strong and I will overpower you physically in this moment to put you in your place in a because sexual assault and rape is an power, and the word is escaping me, but it's about power, not about
it's never about
sexual
sex,
gratification. And I think we so saw that in that scene too, that was like, this is about instilling the fear of God in her and making her feel weak and powerless. And I just thought that was a cool inclusion too, that it's like we're also seeing how these dynamics play out across the board, that even the people who run the system don't benefit from it. Patriarchy hurts men.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point. And I think it shows her courage and her determination, which I love. Like, she was there for a reason. Her goal was to be reunited with her child. Like, that's why she was there, and she never lost sight of that. So I would say she kept her humanity better than anyone else did. Now, of course, it was futile in the end. I mean, she lost her life in the whole thing. So she was a martyr. But yet she but she certainly changed the course of the Korean games. Like, so that whole island, that whole thing is shut down, which is a setback. But of course, the last scene we see, it just starting up again, presumably in the US, which is
Right.
another interesting thing. Couple more, actually 3 more women that I'd love to just chat about, because I know
Yeah.
we're running low on time here. Number one, I'm curious about your view of and I forget her number. I should have looked it up, but I forgot. Um, the shamanistic woman in season 3.
Yeah.
'Cause, I don't know if it's a Korean witch. I kind of viewed her more as like a sea shaman, was sort of what I got, like her source of was sort of the elemental spirits of the sea was what she was. I didn't love how she was portrayed, because she was very clearly portrayed as a fraud, and a not so as a charlatan, and as an evil woman. And I took a little bit of umbrage at that. And that's not to say that's not realistic, because I do think that
Right.
there are probably quite a few people who are charlatans and don't really believe in what they're talking about. And I didn't love how she was portrayed, but I'm curious for somebody who has self-identified as a witch at times. And how did you feel about how she was portrayed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it was actually a piece that I kind of had to get past to enjoy anything about that storyline because I think that it actually could have been so much more successful if it was a traditional religious person, like a pastor or a priest. And I'm not exactly sure exactly what the structure of that would look like in Korea. Like who a religious leader there might be in a more structured way, but I'm like, certainly in the United States, our traditional religious structures are very entrenched in this capitalistic system that the show is critiquing. And I'm like, I think that would have actually been a much more interesting critique, like the ways that structured religion are intertwined with government and economic systems, as opposed to like this kind of charlatan depicted character. And of course, there are charlatans out there. There are fake psychics. Like, absolutely, those people exist. But I'm kind of like, there are bad people in every industry, and there are bad people everywhere you look. I would much rather critique the people who are in a place of supreme power that are wielding that for harm than like we even saw other characters in the show. Like, of course, she was able to garner a few followers that trusted her, that she betrayed in the end. But most people in the games thought she was crazy, right? And it's like, how much power does she actually wield, as opposed to a religious pastor or priest that is there? I'm like, what would they do in that scenario? And what kind of respect or reaction would they garner from the other players? And how does that intertwine with this? So I kind
Mm.
of had to set aside my personal disappointment with like, I think I've mentioned in the past, like, I'm tired of the witch hate. Like, I just don't like these things being made out to be, one, evil and scary and bad, but also like false and fake and dumb. It's like that. Not
Yeah.
only is it not true, it's also not creative. It's a tired script. Um, but it does happen, right? So it's like, okay, let's grain of salt there. And then I was able to kind of at least enjoy a little bit of that dynamic because I do think it was an interesting dynamic to see. But I thought there was a lot of space to do more.
I love that, and I agree completely. I hadn't thought about the so you it was an interesting thought experiment I went through as you were talking, and that was as well. Okay, what if this were a born again Christian instead of a shaman, right? And instead of, oh, the ancestors, the spirits of the sea are guiding me. It's Jesus told me to go this way, or the Holy Spirit, and she's praying in tongues or something else. Like, how would that change it?
Right.
How would that change people's view of it? That would anger people. I think that would anger Christians for
Oh,
sure.
yeah.
I mean, I know when I was younger, if we had watched something like, probably that would have been the end of watching that show if it had critiqued somehow Christianity. Now, it would have been perfectly fine to do it for, something that wasn't Christianity because,
Yeah.
that's what you're talking. So I think that's very interesting. I think it just would have been more, I agree with you. It's kind of a tired trope. I actually
Yeah.
think it would have been way more interesting for her to actually have had power, but then have it betray her at the end,
And I
or,
kind of kept
you know,
hoping that
yeah.
there was gonna be something, and I guess in the hide and seek game there was this moment of like, wait, the spirits did guide me to the end, right? And it was left a little open-ended, but not enough for it to be compelling to me.
Oh, I thought I didn't even think it was left open ended in the sense of they very clearly panned in on her little blood arrows she scratched, which to me was them saying it's very clear she's just a faker,
Yeah.
and she's pretending. And that's the thing. That's what bothered me, that she was presented as faking. Like, I would have been perfectly like, it upsets me that she had to be put as a deliberate charlatan versus somebody who, ultimately the magic failed them, or, that's to me, that's way more interesting than just the charlatan, you know, and again, the fact that it's a woman, and
Yeah.
again, this witchy, witchy stereotype that she's evil. I thought they could have done better. Like
I
I was
agree.
disappointed there. Um, let's see, who was another. Uh, well, what did you make of the fact? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say one character that I definitely do want to talk about is the transgender character. Um,
Mm.
I think that that was super fascinating. I think from a kind of meta commentary, knowing that that actor identifies as a man and portrays a transgender character is interesting. As someone who is not transgender and wants to learn to be a good ally and would like to have seen the role go to an actual transgender actor, that's a little disappointing. I do understand that that's probably hard to come by, especially in Korea. I don't fully know the cultural context around that. And from what it seems like, the actor really did his research and really tried his best to portray it from a place of respect. So I'm like, it seems like as good as it could have been to not have cast an actual transgender person, he really tried to do so from a place of respect. But I'm like, would I even have preferred to have a woman that we were told was transgender that maybe biologically was a woman if it wasn't a transgender actor? I don't know. I think there's some nuance in there that's just interesting to think about from a casting standpoint. And in the show, I gotta say, I loved her character. She was someone that it's like you absolutely root for, was such a warrior for the underdogs, and was so powerful. I think that there is an interesting commentary about the kind of physical strength aspect, a little bit like we talked about earlier with these games lending themselves towards physically strong people. And if you're biologically male, but you identify as a woman, what does that do with the dynamic there? That it's like, do you have this leg up as a quote unquote male, but then also this other um piece from being a woman? And I was actually surprised that there wasn't more lashback from other characters in the games, just like hate crime wise. I'm like, I was pretty shocked that that was relatively tame. Um so yeah, I don't know, but I really did love a really positive portrayal of a fucking badass trans woman. I was like,
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
pretty cool.
I am curious what our listeners, particularly if we any transgender listeners, how they felt about the portrayal. I did not know
Yeah.
that fact that you just shared, and great for sharing that. Um, I that their death in the show. I mean, his is the actor, but the hers or theirs is the character.
Mhm.
Was definitely one of the saddest moments of the show for me. I was yelling at the screen like, "Don't turn!" Like the whole time. It's like, "Don't go in that door! Don't do!" Because
Yeah.
you could see it coming. I mean, we all knew it was coming because it had to come. It still was sad, but yeah, I think the actor. I thought it was a respectful performance. I thought it was really well handled in general.
Yeah.
Now, here's an interesting question that occurred to me though: if the Squid Games was all women, would the how would you feel about having a transgender woman
You
in the
know,
games?
that's
Yeah,
an
I mean,
interesting question.
it's a thought experiment, it
Yeah.
is a thought experiment.
Especially with all the dialogue around, transgender participation in sports and like when a life is on the line versus a win or a loss. Does that change your relationship to it, right? And obviously I think we should be valuing human lives more than wins and losses in a game, but for people who spend their entire lives training for the Olympics, maybe it does feel life or death. And I do think that's an interesting thought experiment. Yeah, and I'll just also add that caveat of neither of us are transgender individuals, so this could be a total certainly would like to hear from someone who is seeing themselves represented, since this is from a different perspective. But um Yeah, and as someone who is very much an advocate of transgender participation in sports, and as a woman who participated in extremely competitive sports growing up, still very much an advocate of, hey, all sports are unfair. You know, like, uh, I'm forgetting the Olympic swimmer's name. Why am I forgetting his name? But his wingspan is like a third of the length longer than anyone else's, and
Michael
he's
Phelps, is that
Michael
Michael Phelps?
Phelps, yes, and
Yeah,
he's
he's genetically engineered to swim essentially.
to
Yeah.
to be this athlete. And so to me, I'm kind of like, all sports are unfair. And if it was all women, I do think there would be more discussion there. But I'm like, also, it would still be just as, maybe not just as unfair as it is now, because it would be different, but it's like there would be women that are in better shape than other women. There would be women that are taller and stronger, and women that are shorter and meeker, and um all sorts of things. And it's like, there is the spectrum. But I agree. I think that it would shift some of the conversation around it.
I agree. Um, I also thought it was interesting that this season 3 introduced a female, rich person in the,
Yeah.
in,
Yeah.
which I guess I'm curious, what did you did so she presumably is one of the people in power, that whatever her costume was, I don't remember. Um, so does having women in power make systems less oppressive? Like, we would automatically think that it would, but I'm not so sure that that's the case based on what they're that, and the fact that, I mean, in the end, we see a female, uh, recruiter, I guess we'll say,
Yeah.
at the very end, right? Showing that the show goes on, and that, again, so now we have again a woman in power. Does that make it any less oppressive? And I think,
Yeah.
to me, no. If anything, it might make it worse, because women will think of ways. I mean, if somebody was so inclined, I think, because of how maybe women see things differently, they may come up with things that are actually worse in some that a man would have never come up with from
Yeah.
a perspective. I think we can all be shitty. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a
Right.
woman. So
That's
I'm actually curious about that. But what do you
yeah, that's an
what do you?
interesting thought. I do think um it in my mind, it's very much like you can't use the tools of the oppressor to overthrow the oppressor. You have to do something completely different. And we do see this woman, rich person, and even in that dynamic, she's sexualized. She's made fun
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
She's undermined. And I'm like, yep, even though she is one of these people in power, she is still the butt of the joke in this other circumstance. And I was like, yeah, that sounds pretty fair. Um to at least my personal experience being in different environments. Um and to your other broader question, I think you can't be the only one, right? I think that it makes me think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's answer to the question, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? She said, when they're all women. When every single one is a woman. That's when there will be enough women on the Supreme Court. Because I do think even if you had a split of like half women, half men on the Supreme Court, you're still playing within the structure of patriarchy. And it's like, oh, well, we reached equality. It goes back to that question of equity, that it's like, until the internalized structures have really been unrooted and thrown out, everyone is playing that game. And women have internalized misogyny and racism and sexism and all of the other things, just like everyone else. Um, and I think even in this woman being in power, we see her fall victim to patriarchy, even at the top of the system. But I'm like, even having one other woman in that room may have made more of a difference. And if every single woman in that room was a woman, if every single person in that room was a woman, how would that look different? And even adding, I think with the current structure we have, you can't just say, we'll put women in charge and it will be better. You have to say, no, 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 no. Let's actually go back to basics and build something up, starting with talking and listening to women. Yeah, I don't know.
Interesting. I love
Do
that.
you
I
have
love that.
any thoughts on that to kind of round out this conversation on Squid Game?
It leads me to more questions, and the real
Of
question,
course.
and I'll leave. I guess we'll leave our listeners and with this is if you were going to redesign the Squid Games from a feminist perspective.
Ooh,
So again, same stakes, like same deadly stakes, but the rules are whatever you want to be. But again, there can be only one. The goal, same type of goal. How would you structure it? And how would the listeners structure it to highlight different aspects of women's experiences under capitalism? I mean, again, we're kind of going with this broad theme. Like how might we better structure it to truly? Because I think I don't know that we've made this analogy, right? Okay, there's definitely some with the baby and how we treat women's experiences under capitalism in our society. But how would you change it to even be more reflective? I guess is or to highlight some different aspects.
yeah. I think that's really, really interesting. My gut reaction, because at first I thought you were asking, like, if you were in the world of Squid Game and you were a feminist, but you were like the arbiter of these games, and my response was going to be, well, you can't be a feminist and create these games. You just can't, right? Like that doesn't work. But then I was like, oh, that's not what he's asking. He's saying, if you were going to essentially rewrite the script of the show Squid Game from a feminist perspective, what would shift and change? And I'm going to have to think on that one. Maybe
Yeah,
maybe
I
I'll
don't.
make
Yeah,
yeah.
maybe we can and I love other people's thoughts too because I
Yeah.
don't. And it's an unfair question to ask at the very end, which is why I did it because it's a deeper question. But
Sure.
um, I think it's interesting. And I want to think about it as well.
Yeah.
Maybe and I love other people's thoughts. Like, how would you make it? How would you structure it to highlight again some of the particularly, I mean, because this is highlighting the haves and have nots inequality as well. I mean, then there's a whole, it's very
Right.
clear on that. But what would change to make it highlight even the gender differences in our society under capitalism, the way we live more as well? Like what would be, because I think the motherhood issue is very clear to me that's very analogous to a
Mhm.
lot of women's experiences in our capitalistic society. But what are some other areas? What are other areas?
Yeah.
I'm curious. Maybe we'll have a follow-up if people are interested. We'll talk more about it.
Yeah.
Let's let it percolate. But
Follow up,
awesome.
or if we don't have a follow up, we'll at least make a TikTok or something
I love it.
about our thoughts so we can get
Yeah,
some out there.
that'd be
But
great.
yeah, this was awesome. I always think more deeply about things after chatting about it, and always have some good insights as well, and learn more about myself and my reactions to it. So thank you as always, Dennis, for the lovely conversation.
Likewise, this was awesome. Good stuff. And to all of our listeners, if you've made it to an end of another one, well, we thank you, and would love to hear from you. Would love to know what you like and what else we should do. But we'll keep on keeping on because that's what we do here. So, as always, it's been
Absolutely.
lovely. Thank you, everyone. And I'll kick it
Thank
over to
you,
you to say
everyone.
goodbye, Reese.
Yes, we will catch you all next time. Thank y'all so much. Bow Down is a weekly podcast from the Cohere Collective that explores esoteric and empowered feminism.
Please subscribe to Bow Down wherever you may be listening. And if you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a like, a 5-star rating, and a review. And if there's anyone you think would enjoy this episode, or maybe just needs to hear it, please share it.
If you want to stay up to date on all things Bow Down, you can follow the Cohere Collective on any social media platform at the Cohere Collective, and check out other content and offerings at www.thecoherecollective.com.
If you're interested in working with Reese to find and pursue your purpose, I encourage you to head to www.thecoherecollective.com/life-coaching.
If you're interested in working with Dennis to shed your mask and embrace your desires, you can email Dennis at dennis@theheartstoybox.com.
A huge thank you to Jack Corbett for Bow Down's music. You can find him on Instagram at j.corbe. Thank you all for joining us today. We're so glad you're here.
And as always, we hope you feel like you are living more coherently. And until next time, love.